the glamour of the Unily Podcast and what it's like.
Here's the view of my home office, which actually is just a desk pressed up against a wall. And normally I have a nice little sliver of Manhattan over there, but we are in kind of a whiteout today.
I'm really feeling a pink and blue theme today. So you can see I've got my pink salmonish top with my blue Unily water bottle, pink Oreos randomly because, yeah, that's what lockdown's done to me.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Unily Podcast. I'm Paul Seda. I'm joined once again by Caitlin Oriema, Kaz Hassan. Alex has taken a much-deserved break this week, so we're joined by Matt Boyd over in the UK. Matt, thanks for joining us. We'll have a really good topic today for you, and we're looking forward to kind of what you share with us. But we have to do a little bit of housekeeping. First things first, you'll notice we're all wearing very fancy headphones. Unily has done the kindest of kindnesses and given us new equipment because apparently we have to be professionals. Who knew? So we're going to try to make this a little bit more professional sounding and looking. And the reason I say we have to be more professional is because we've got 10 whole subscribers, or maybe in the time I've been speaking, it's actually gone up to 11 to the YouTube channel. Which, you know what, we're grateful for it. We're grateful for anything. I don't think we anticipated even that. So we want to give those folks who are out there, as I said, in the universe, as good a show as we can. The joke here we were talking about was look out PewDiePie, but I don't even know who that is. So that shows you how uncool I am. Yeah, he's apparently a podcaster. My wife made the joke that no one who watches your podcast is going to know who that is or frankly care. So insert your favorite podcaster here. I did want to go over a couple comments we got. We got good feedback, which was nice, welcome, surprising. We had some comments on YouTube, on LinkedIn. We had a lot of comments internally from customers and employees, frankly. This is from Zainab. Salient points and quite frank. Great space to be in as it's an evolving platform, but also evolving employee needs given the velocity of consumer application innovation. Keep it up. Encouraging words. Thank you so much for that. And then Margie, who I've actually worked with as a customer, wrote, I listened to the whole episode today and it was so good. Thanks to the team for sharing your perspectives and challenging us to make the most of our employee platform. So thank you so much, Margie. That was really kind and sweet. So big news, Unite will be returning in 2021. We ran it in 19. It's our conference. It's a way for us to gather. We skipped it in 2020 for obvious reasons, but it's coming back. We're going to do a formal announcement in the spring. It was a blast in 2019. I had a fabulous time. In fact, I wanted to ask everyone what their favorite kind of memory or story was from Unite 19. So Caitlin, what in your mind was the best memory of Unite 2019?
The best memory, if I'm thinking PG or PG-13.
Yeah, no rated R. This is a family show.
This is a family show. So I'll give you the PG version. Actually, it was meeting with our customers. I got to, at that time, I was a CSM with Unily, so I got to see our customers quite a bit as it was, but seeing all of them together in one place was super special, especially in like more of a casual setting too, you know, with the happy hours, with the 80s party, just having fun. And then, you know, kind of relaxing a bit, sipping some tequila and having conversations about things, you know, even outside of Unily and cool things that were happening. So yeah, that was kind of my general favorite part about it.
And Matt, you're joining us for the first time. What do you remember? What's the memory that sticks out for you?
Do I remember is a good question.
That's a good
I had
question.
to present, Paul, you forget I had to present on the second day. So, the party for me, I had to take it a little bit slower. There was a little less sipping of tequila, but I did get a great chance to meet the real Tom Cruise. Kind of.
Tom, if you're listening, please don't sue us for libel or anything like that.
First day on the show, podcast taken off the air.
We'll get some other celebrity, perhaps a Matthew McConaughey, and he'll let us know everything is all right. Right? Like terrible joke. I will move on. I'm not telling jokes anymore. Echo what Caitlin said. It was so nice, even though I'd spent time with them in a formal business capacity, just talking to my customers in informal sessions and getting to know more about them, right? We sometimes forget, like, we're all people at the end of the day. So that was a real blast. The rest of it is a blur. I genuinely tried to forget about it because it was so chaotic, but behind the scenes, but it was so much fun. So I want to get to the topic of the podcast today. We're going to be discussing productivity in the remote work era. This is critical for a number of reasons, right? There's, for years and years and years, remote work cycled back and forth between being okay and not okay, okay and not okay, right? In my own career, I've moved back and forth from being able to be remote to being forced to be in an office or somewhere in between. It's the ebbs and flows of what the studies are saying at a given moment, and frankly, what leadership and the culture of an organization is in terms of what they allow. The funny thing is, when you're forced to have everyone work remotely, you have to start asking yourself some questions. Number one, what does it mean to be productive? Which is probably something we didn't think about before, right? Like, I went in for my review and my boss told me if I'm doing a good job or not, right? But when your boss isn't watching you nonstop, you don't always know whether or not you're being judged as an employee properly. And as a manager, how do you know what your folks are working on? Are they being productive in their job? Is it worth measuring productivity? And if so, do the old measures make sense, right? These are just some of the questions I think we'll roll through today as we cover the topic. So I'll start with Matt because you're new. You're joining us for the first time. So it's going to be trial by fire.
Of course.
Let me ask you a question. How do you think we should think about productivity when we're not all sitting around in the office together? Do we need to rethink how we determine whether or not someone is being productive or whether or not we as an organization are being productive? I know that's a broad question, but play with it a little bit, right? Give us whatever you think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. First, I think it's a really poignant question. Really, when you start to evaluate what productivity means to organizations today, it really starts with looking at the way in which organizations have changed over the last kind of 30, 40 years. When we start to look at the increased digitization within organizations, the ability to take advantage of digital tools to get work done, to achieve outcomes. And obviously that goes back a long way. And when we talk about productivity, for me, it's still very strange that we think about it in a very, very one-track mind kind of approach, which is time on task. I think I can even draw parallels with my own job, for example, where, some things that I do are about coming up with ideas, trying to innovate or collaborate with colleagues and peers and work out a good route forwards or solve challenges. The time I spend working through those problems or thinking or reading and contributing to internal knowledge and coming up with new ideas isn't necessarily easily tracked as time on task. It's all about the output.
And how do you, just to be clear, how do you define time on task, right? Like what, I know it seems obvious, but maybe not everyone's heard of it. and maybe actually by you giving us a description, we can come up with a new measure to replace it, because we're solving all the problems of the world on this podcast directly.
I was going to say, I can feel the pressure weighing down on me here. No, I think it's for me, when I talk about time on task, I talk about a very simplistic view of somebody's working day, where you can say they need to complete a to-do list of 1, 2, 3, 4 items, and then you can say how much time did it take you to complete each item. And actually what we find is that most people's jobs are a lot more complex than saying, fill in this spreadsheet, click these check boxes in this system, move this file over into here. The modern digital worker is working in more nuanced ways than that. And it's very difficult to say categorically that X task takes X time, track that, log it, and then we know you're being productive.
Right. And I think that's important, because a lot of the history of productivity measures come from earlier days in the industrial economy, where manufacturing was the majority of what people did, right? You hear everyone saying we've transitioned to the knowledge economy, where you're not producing X widgets, right? Yeah. Although Matt and Kaz actually do produce widgets as part of the right. Oops. So maybe we should be measuring you guys by that measure. But it's, as a metric, it's still useful in certain scenarios, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Because of the nature we work. And Kaz, you and Matt work together. How do you like to be judged? Maybe that's the question. How do you like to be judged in terms of productivity? What would you tell people if they say, well, how do I know you're productive? What do you say to them?
So that is an interesting way to word it. And I'm a little bit conflicted about the answer, because part of me is a bit of a data geek. So when we talk about time on task and things like that, I get that when it comes to time on task, those sorts of measures originally come from, here's a physical product, and we got to this physical product by doing this, and then this, and then this. And obviously things don't work like that anymore. But the data geek in me loves that information. And I think there is value to be had in still, as you say, in kind of some circumstances, taking those measures. Like for me, for example, and actually I think this applies across a lot of organizations, is there will be repeatable tasks that happen across every employee or every organization or across every industry. They may be things like, if you've got shift workers, they'll be logging timesheets and things like that. We all log paid time off or annual leave, this sort of thing. So, and I think you can kind of aggregate those tasks and measure them, right? And I think there's value to be had in saying, these are the top 50 tasks that happen across our organization, and being able to say, does that task take 30 minutes? Can we get that down to 5 minutes? So when it comes to measuring my productivity or how I think I'm productive, part of me thinks in terms of the numbers, right? So what repeatable tasks am I doing, and am I doing that in an effective and efficient way? So half of me is all about that data side. And then the other part of me is that, and Matt and I work quite closely on some product features, and you don't get the best product features just by having a very fixated, process-driven view. A lot of that comes from creativity and bouncing off each other, collaboration, innovation, right? The more intangible stuff. And that's the bit which is obviously trickier to measure, because if you're asking me about my productivity and am I being productive, I can quite easily lean on some of the more tangible measures and say, well, actually, I created X number of user stories this week, but that obviously doesn't tell the whole story. Are those user stories good? Is the output of those user stories actually giving value to customers? So it's a much more complicated thing than it seems on the surface. Yeah. And that's why I'm giving you a really way about answer in terms of how I would answer that.
No, it's fine, because I think all of us are conflicted around this. So Caitlin and I sit in sales. I think I've mentioned this, and we have very clear metrics that we're judged on, right? It's the number of deals that close that we were a contributor to. So in a lot of ways, it's easier for us to show our productivity. But I can say that certain deals, even if the dollar amount isn't as high as other deals, require way more effort. And we just don't have a great way to measure that. I mean, Caitlin, I'm curious how you how you look at yourself and the work you do and go, I was productive today, versus just that strict dollars and cents kind of metric that we're judged by.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think about like people I've worked with who are productive too, on our team, Glenn Chambers, right? Like we know him, and he is by far above and beyond the most productive and efficient person I've ever worked with. And I've paid close attention to what he does, and we've been on the sales side together for a while. And what makes him productive too, and then a couple other facets of that as well, what I think makes people generally productive in their roles. But it's the ability to find things quickly and reference them and then action something so that you can get it done, because you know who you need to reach out to. I'm moving around my hands a lot, but
you talk with your hands a lot.
Yeah, I do. I'm from New Jersey and I'm half Italian, so so it's knowing who to reach out to get an answer to something and where you can find something, and it's also being equipped with the technology to be able to do that, to search efficiently and find what you're looking for, and also creating a network of peers internally to find answers to things like that. So for me, when I've had a productive day, it's when I've had a number of calls with either internal or with clients, and where I can actually action the output of those calls efficiently. I'm also just personally much more productive when I'm super engaged and I'm passionate about what I'm doing. I think about like previous roles at other companies I've been in where, 30% of my job objectives were actually based on efficiency. How many, it was insurance, how many claims did you close over a certain period of time, and how long did it take to close those? It's a little bit similar to sales, right?
Right.
If you don't love what you're doing, you're not going to be as high of a performer. So if we're like you and I and all of us, we're passionate about the digital HQ and digital workplace. So we're producing so much output and we're working super hard and efficiently to do a good job because we love what we do.
Right.
So that's when I've had a good day, is when I can actually have meetings and then action the output of those meetings. Yes. If I can do it same day, that's a really good day. So
yeah, no, I hear you. And I take a video game or a board gamer's mentality to work, because I love games, right? It's one of my passions. And I've always felt if I can kind of like challenge myself. There's the famous episode of The Simpsons where Principal Skinner gets trapped under newspapers, and to entertain himself, he found a basketball and counted how many consecutive bounces he could do before the basketball slipped away. And then he tried to beat his record, right? Boy, that's an obscure reference, but relevant, because I found that like the minute I can find a way to make my job transactional and figure out ways to record that transaction, I can try to challenge myself to beat my record, right, in terms of transactions. And that has the nice benefit of making it so that I tend to challenge myself and go forward. But I still don't think those types of transactional things are necessarily where all the work is done. Absolutely. I think what Matt's, I think Matt, what you said about like there's that free space where you kind of need to almost like sit there, like some Zen monk. But go ahead.
No, that's absolutely true, right? So this is one of, and I have two major issues with time on task measures for productivity. And the first one actually was raised by Kaz, and it ties into, basically what keeps me in a paycheck, part of it at least, which is to come up with ideas and to be innovative. And what I think actually is that when too much time around productivity is focused specifically on how much time you spent on each individual task and did you complete X, Y, Z transaction, what you actually do is you stifle innovation. You actually drive out the free time, the space you need on a day-to-day basis to actually come up with ideas, to find creative answers to problems. And, you know, that's what we all do, right? You know, working at Unily, you know, trying to improve the employee experience for organizations. We're trying to find creative solutions to problems in the organization to improve employee experience. And, you know, when you're hard pressed to prove where every minute was spent on a day-to-day basis, then you get very concerned about the time you spend, for example, reading innovative articles that you spotted on LinkedIn when, you know, there isn't necessarily at this point a tangible output. And, you know, that stifling innovation, you know, due to that like pressure is, you know, I think can be very destructive. And on top of that, you know, it's, you know, neuroscientists have proven that you're most creative when your body is like, you know, releasing dopamine. They say that's why all your best ideas come to you in the shower because you're relaxed, right? You haven't spoken to your boss yet that day. So that's you're right. Like relaxed, you know, you haven't started work. The pressure of getting X, Y, Z done hasn't started. And that's when you get your best ideas. And I think encouraging us to have a little bit of that freedom within our day to you know, innovate and, you know, a bit of serendipity, a bit of natural discovery is a really important way for organizations to advance themselves.
Yeah, I'll say this. It does feel like there's a little bit more of an enlightened understanding than maybe there was, you know, a number of years ago. I think people are starting to accept that I can't be put to task by a taskmaster and be expected to do that as a machine, right? Number one, that makes sense because frankly, a lot of that transactional based stuff can be automated away. And this terrifies people, but the reality is that even as that stuff is automated away, it opens up the opportunity for human beings to be creative in how they figure out maybe a better way to run that process. Because just because something can be done quickly doesn't mean it's done well. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just as an aside, Caitlin and I are in a role that is sales focused, yes, but we actually have to be at the forefront of information and knowledge, right? So I'm constantly telling her, like, you've got to reserve time on your calendar to train and learn about things that have bubbled up in conversations with prospects. So that you're prepared to talk about that. And you always say, hey, look, that's a topic I don't know. Let me look at that, right? But you have to work that in as part of your natural process because you may have just spotted a trend that's becoming more and more critical for us in our role. And you better darn well be able to speak about it intelligently.
And then I think the productive output of that too is when you do learn something, right? So something came up, you don't have an answer to something, you need to get a task done, but then are you retaining that information or putting it somewhere where you can reference it again so that you don't have to go through the whole process again, you know, and not know where to look or who to go to find the answer. It's like actually retaining the information to learn it and then use it in the future too. And to me, that's like the ultimate level of productivity too. And I think with what you were saying too, and making time for yourself as an employee to even do external learning and development and things too keeps you productive because the whole concept of like even 10 years ago of like managers who were watching the clock to make sure you were sitting at your desk at 8:30 a.m. like that's not what makes a good employee, you know. In fact, I would argue like somebody who's working 14 hours a day there might be some serious efficiency issues there. Like they might not be the best employee. But yeah, I think exactly what you were saying is right on, and taking that and actually retaining it and using it again later.
Okay, so we've decided time on task is terrible. We didn't decide that. I think what we're kind of coalescing around, I don't mean to speak for everyone, but I'll try to go somewhere with this, is that time on task is a good measure. Like Kaz said, we want to look at data. Like there's value to it, right? But no one metric is going to be the absolute perfect measure of, you know, whether or not a person is productive. There's some other things out there that maybe we need to look at. But let's come back, right? Because we're talking now about productivity in the remote work era. So that's a little bit different than your manager watching you. We're now in a situation where you have to self-monitor, because there isn't someone looking over your shoulder asking you what you're on. Your manager can message you and email you, but it's just not the same, right? Because they can't read your body language. They can't look in your eyes. They can't see that I'm saying, yes, I'm being productive, but my body and my face are actually showing that I'm scared and struggling with a task. So I need help, right? So how are you self-monitoring? I guess, Caitlin, like, how do you self-monitor yourself to make sure psychologically you're in a good headspace and that you're doing the things you need to do, right?
Yeah, I think maybe I've spoken to three of you about this, but I actually have started scheduling. This isn't specific to tasks, but like and things I need to get done. But I've started scheduling Headspace time during either early mornings or even midday to just, it kind of goes back to what Matt was talking about with kind of like you're getting your creative juices flowing. It's like, if you don't step away sometimes and you just sit at your desk in the same spot, looking at the same computer screen for 8, 9, 10 hours straight, the output starts going down, down, down. Like I've even noticed, I set times for myself where I'm like, I can't work past this certain hour of night because my output is not as high quality as it needs to be or as it should be. So it's just not worth it to work past, 7:30 or 8 p.m. for example.
Oh my God.
But I think only
Stop
sometimes.
that.
Only sometimes. I mentioned that efficiency problem, right? No, but I think scheduling those times to make sure I know it's a good day when I have had my calls, noted the actions that were the outcome of those calls, and then also taken time to do like a walk on my boring track that I do with my mask on every day, to clear my head and then get reset and re-energized to carry on with the rest of my day.
And Kaz,
yeah.
And Kaz, do you do something similar, or how are you? Caitlin actually answered, I think, a better question is how are you making sure that you're taking care of yourself to stay productive, right? Because I think if you're working anywhere for any period of time, it's because people have the expectation that you are productive. You're doing good works. They keep you around because they have confidence that what you're doing is of value. So I guess what are you doing to make sure that you're staying top of your game, while you're working remote?
Yeah, I think I suffer from a similar problem to Caitlin, which is around the timings and things like that. And it's weird because no matter, like, we've been working from home for a long period now, and like the longer it's gone on, what I've realised is that my struggle with not being in a physical office environment is that I struggle to stop at a certain time, and things just slowly leak into other hours, and I don't personally like have a problem with that, and there's a reason I do that. I enjoy my job and I get good outputs and things like that, but after a while I started to realise that, as Caitlin said, this isn't productive, it's not helpful to me, it's probably not helpful to the people I work with, this sort of stuff. So the way I've tried to ensure that my productivity stays high is that I need to make sure that in general I kind of just give and take at certain points. So literally a couple of hours before this call, I went on a run, gave myself a bit of a break, thought about stuff on my run completely different, and then there are so many examples of that where my day is no longer about getting to a space, output, removing from that space and leaving it behind, and that is really the kind of symptom of our changing work culture. But where I've got a problem where it's like I need to be able to stop, what I can do is then have a give and take and have like an honest conversation with myself to say, okay, well, this is the way I work and there's not a problem with that, but I can flex at different points and have trust with my manager and my team to make sure that like we're all on the same page. And ultimately that's probably what's getting me through this and helping me to stay productive, is that kind of give and take and that trust element, which allows me to flex around how I'm feeling that day, what I'm doing, this sort of stuff.
So I'm gonna ask Matt. I'm gonna throw a grenade at you, Matt.
Oh, here we go. I'm already getting hot under the collar.
Because we kind of touched upon this in the previous podcast, and we were talking about more or less the tools are such now that they can rope you in. Right? Like you think about Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. I'm a Twitter guy. Reddit. I'm also a Reddit guy. They are very good at like sucking you in, right?
Yeah.
So we've designed a tool that's meant to be engaging for our customers and to help them engage their employees. Are we maybe guilty of making these tools too engaging? And I want you to be as honest as possible and shoot off the cuff.
Yeah.
Or is there some personal responsibility on people and maybe us as a culture to say we have to know where to set our boundaries?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, especially as it pertains to productivity, because a lot of what we're talking about here is time away from the desk, right? So, or time specifically away from tasks that we need to get done. In terms of what we do as an organization, the employee experience platforms, intranets, digital workplace solutions, various different names for it, depending upon each organization's stance on the technology, really. I think that what we're actually doing is, in many ways, facilitating productivity, not acting as a distraction from the day-to-day work. I mean, actually, Caitlin made some really excellent points talking about how productivity wasn't just the case of her getting tasks done, but about her being able to contribute, that information, those kind of, processes and that best practice essentially back in, so that whether it's her, you, or even, Glenn Chambers, shout out to Glenn, it's making those processes more efficient. So then, we, for instance, provide a lot of those kind of functionalities. We look to connect people faster, find that, tacit knowledge that's locked inside your people, connect people with the right skills, get answers, feed that into whatever work you're doing, achieving better, more intelligent, decision making or outputs. That's all productive, and it's part of what the employee experience platform delivers. And beyond that, if you, from a specifically employee engagement standpoint, if you take this kind of, intranet technology and kind of engaging people in your business story, and that's, a culmination of the wins and the losses that as a community you go through on that, business journey, engaging them in that story is really, I think, one of the most powerful tools you have in driving productivity, because I am most productive when I'm really on that day feeling super connected to the mission. I see the mission as critical, then I know that, my work feeds into this portion of the mission, and that's how I help get us over the line and achieve that goal. So I think, when we're really driving engagement through this technology, it, shouldn't be seen as a distraction at all. It's empowering people really to connect with you, your business goal, and driving them to do even better work, which I think is critical.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too that I think about with, like, when we talk about the personal apps we use or the consumer apps we use versus our work apps, having the ability, and Unily lets you do this too, but having the ability to turn the volume up and down on the level of engagement you get, like, from those, like, that's being pushed at you versus what you're pulling, is so powerful, because I've set limits for myself on my personal apps during work hours, and then I've set limits for myself on my work apps during off work hours. And then I've also, even we call it rock stars in our Unily app, when I'm like, whoa, I'm getting way too many notifications, this is super distracting, I bookmark things and unfollow them, or I turn some notifications off, so that I can control the noise, because our brains are so cluttered with information that you have to be able, in any work app you use, just like our personal apps, to be able to turn those things up and down.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kaz.
I was going to say it's funny because this this podcast is starting to like show some of the links between the themes that we're discussing. So one of my friends watched last week's podcast, and he doesn't work in a similar field or anything. He works in publishing, and he dropped me a comment to say, like, love the content, it was great, and it helped me think about a few different things. But one thing he said was exactly that point. He was like, well, you know, I log on at 8:30 and I log off at 4:30, and I do my work and I leave and that's done. And he was like, I'm struggling to understand the other stuff, like the engagement stuff. And I was like, that's interesting, because, you know, there are a lot of companies that haven't evolved on that journey, right? There are people that don't have intranets, or if they do, they're, you know, basic file storage systems or just like static information. So I kind of, the work person in me was like, oh, I'm gonna probe here a little bit to find out, you know, what the rest of the story is. And I was like, okay, so that's great. And he likes the ability to switch on and off at a certain time, which I can definitely respect. You know, everyone is different types of thinkers, different type of workers in different fields. So I was like, oh, so how do you problem solve with your like team? How do you help them get things done? What do you do if you've got a particular challenge that, you know, you could do with some support from your colleagues on? And his response to that was, well, actually, this isn't something we do. We don't engage like that. We just go on and then we go off. And that for me was an interesting point, because I was like, it's difficult to see the outside when you're not in it, but there's real value to be had in this kind of engaging technology, which gives you a platform to have things like conversations, share knowledge, hold that sort of stuff. And it may seem easy to look at it from a very one-dimensional way, which is, you know, I go and do my tasks and I get my task done and then I'm done. But don't underestimate some of that more intangible connection type stuff in helping your productivity.
Yeah. And to kind of bring it full circle, what resonated with me that Matt said was, the tool is meant to enable you to be productive and engaged in the time that you're supposed to be working, right? Or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Right? It's not meant to keep you working non-stop. That's not good engagement. That's not good. That's not being productive. That's being, you know, someone who's going way.
I'm sure.
Caitlin dropped the A word.
A work addict.
A work addict. Yeah. No. And then it was. It's interesting to me then that the other opposite extreme of that is you have Kaz's colleague or friend, who it sounds like is not really engaged at all. Yeah. Right. So
your friend is going to be.
Yeah, I was careful not to name drop there, but he'll watch and he'll know.
Number, national ID number.
Yeah.
Number, right.
He works for this company.
Exactly. Like that's also a terrifying extreme too, for me, because there's nothing scarier than going to a job where I'm switched off constantly.
Yeah.
That is I'm at work so much that to be here and not be into it at all, and literally just watching the clock so I can get the heck out of there is a nightmare scenario. By the way, if you've never watched Joe versus the Volcano, it's a Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan movie. Watch it. The whole beginning of that movie is about non-engaged employees. It's a classic. Matt, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I think it's this whole kind of conversation around being engaged and how that pertains to productivity. I think it's, I can understand that sometimes people will have jobs where, they don't feel particularly passionately about the mission, and that, they're not necessarily engaged. And I think that is that is the good fight that every organization should be tackling head on. I mean, you talk about productivity, and we're talking about it like, should we be measuring people's time and how many tasks they're getting done, and then I'm making a case for innovation and all of that. But when you look at the bottom line, when you've got a disengaged workforce who are, doing the hours and maybe being productive on paper, like they're doing the job that you've assigned to them, what you also need to be measuring is how many of those employees leave after a year, like 2 years. And the upskill time, there's plenty of research and studies on the upskill time and how much it costs organizations to, bring new people in to empty roles. But during that upskill time, you're evaluating that as like cost to the business, but there's a significant productivity drain right there in turnover. Obviously some industries suffer from that more than others. But, we talk about, losing people because they're not connected to your mission and they don't feel like they're part of a community that's all like pulling in the same direction. Right. Then you have a massive, massive productivity problem. Or at least if you're not feeling it now, you will be in the future. So, it's, for me, I think it's absolutely critical right now. But I'm almost fanatical about the topic, so
yeah, no.
And I think that's also the responsibility too, I think, of leadership to identify managers, leadership to identify people who are high performers but seem disengaged, or you might call them like a flight risk or something, right? Like, shoot, we have this really high performer, they have all this output, they're doing great work, but you can tell they're not happy. Or you have like low work environment scores or something. Like, are you also, so that you can retain the talent, are you also proactively managing them in a way where you're nurturing like what their skill sets or passions are, so that you can maybe redirect them in the organization where the productivity will be there, but then the passion's there too, and you can retain them. I think that's like a whole, career path, and, HR strategy and stuff too. But I think that goes back to enabling employees to have those open conversations and having a culture of transparency, but then leadership also feeling empowered to saying like, maybe they'd be better on a different team. Like maybe, but we want to keep them internally, but maybe they need to move around or something.
But Caitlin, so you just said maybe, and maybe indirectly, that productivity doesn't mean engagement, right? Because I'm thinking if someone is knocking it out of the park, that's the model employee, right? And they're clearly engaged. Have you seen examples, or in your own world, have you found yourself be productive without being engaged?
Yeah, I mean, I'd use myself as an example in a previous role and company. Great company, not what I was passionate about. I had great scores. That efficiency score was there, high NPS with customers. Wasn't an industry or a job role I was passionate about, so it was time to move on. But if there was, potentially, this was a long time ago, but potentially if there was other paths into different areas of the company, maybe there would have been a retention opportunity. But again, good performance scores, but just what engagement wasn't super high. And I think that it goes back to that whole, I mean, I really think that's a great point you made, Matt, about the feeling connected to the mission, and those are the days that you're most productive. I totally agree. We all have days, I think, where you're like, what am I doing again? And you know what?
Every day. Check in with you a lot more.
What do I do here? No, not quite that, but like, you know what I mean? Like where you have a day where you're like, I was just off today. I feel like I didn't. Yeah, we've had that conversation where I'm like, I was working all day, but I'm not quite sure what got done. Yeah. Where you didn't stop, but you don't feel like you were productive. And maybe I'm unpacking this like I'm at a therapy session, but maybe what Matt was saying is dead on, where it's like maybe there was that disconnect of the connected to the mission thing going on.
I think there's an interesting point that Caitlin made there, which we perhaps didn't expect to come up, which is the point around you can be productive and not necessarily engaged. But I think what that talks to is around how we're actually measuring productivity is perhaps a bit short-term and short-sighted,
right?
Because you may think you're productive because, the scores are high, but does that score tell the full picture and the full story, which is, you were an asset in terms of what you could provide to that company and the knowledge you had and your evolution within that company, and your knowledge is able to, the longer you're there, you can push the company forward, and the knowledge you have, you can help your colleagues and things like that. So I think what I learned from what you said is that, I agree that the two things aren't synonymous, but it's interesting because I think when we talk about productivity, we also started about talking about time on task, didn't we? Which again are kind of more like short-term measures. But to Matt's point earlier around like thinking about the more indirect measures that make up the productivity picture, which is, churn of employees. And obviously that has a cost in itself, but then you've got the loss of knowledge and all these factors which contribute to productivity, but aren't necessarily the first thing that come to mind when we discuss it.
And, I think the really, another really interesting point, which actually ties back to what you and Caitlin were saying about, striking a balance between, traditional measures of productivity, being at your desk and kind of completing work that you've got to do and things like that, and balancing that with, for example, going for an afternoon run or, walking around the block with your mask on. The thing there, and the reason I harken back to the company mission and the engagement piece is that, when we talk about productivity right now, like Paul said, in the era of remote work, like where you can't really do much at all outside of work, you end up in this position where actually your personal life, for many has taken a dip in terms of fulfillment. And, therefore, if you don't get any fulfillment, or, and your job isn't fulfilling, like you don't feel like you're doing great stuff, that can be really difficult for people. How do you motivate someone to do great work every day and be productive, whatever that means to your organization, if you've got minimal social life because the world's in a global pandemic, and then they don't necessarily believe in the mission that your company is striving for? They're going to be in a really tough place, and that knocks productivity incredibly hard.
Yeah, the short-termism of productivity is, I think, where most people are focused without even realizing it. Not understanding that the short-term gains do, in fact, have some serious side effects that can cause problems. And again, I like the story. You guys have heard of Kanban, I imagine. Matt, Kaz, and I'm pretty sure Kate too. It's now very popular in software development circles, or at least it has been for a while. It's a model for how you produce software, in an efficient, rapid way. The origins of Kanban are really interesting, though, right? And I'm going to butcher this story. I'm not getting the history 100% right. So if there's anyone out there that knows this, don't harass me in the comments. My ego can't take it, or do, because it makes for good material in the next show, right? But the story of Kanban, I believe, started at Toyota, where they were producing cars. And one of the things they realized with defects and problems with production is if they did not stop the production line, the minute a problem or defect was identified in the process, they found that they were going to produce a lot more of that defect or product. So the minute it was identified, I believe someone had a card and would stop the line and run down to the line and say, this is where it's happened. And they talk to the person or persons working at the point in the production line where that was a problem and correct it and teach it. Remember, they're not producing. Everyone who works on that production line has stopped working at this point, right? That's a big hit to productivity. But the idea is we're going to spend so much time after market, after we've sold the car, fixing this thing, that sacrificing the short-term productivity to improve the training and the quality of the work and the product that's being pushed out is of tremendous benefit. And that kind of like approach to the workplace, I think, is probably where a lot of us, want to go with things, right? The short-termism, time to task stuff can be problematic, not only in terms of burning out employees, but maybe even leading to bad outcomes for the organization overall, aside from employee retention and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I only bring that up because so many of the things we say in our own marketing, we're guilty of it, is we talk about employee retention, right, and keeping them engaged and stuff like that, but we don't always connect that really well to what it means for the business from a bottom line perspective. And again, we talk about HR metrics, but again, even that can feel to the non-HR person contrived, right? When we start going, you might be putting out a bad product that's going to make it so people don't want to buy it anymore. That's like, oh, okay, I get it. So enough about my make-believe history of Kanban.
I also nodded my head, and I actually had no idea what that was. So. I made that. I was like, I think I heard that mentioned somewhere once.
Yeah, and you're
so
gonna
I'm
learn
glad
about
you
this.
told that story.
You know what? I have so many stories, Whether or not they're true, accurate, or useful remains to be seen. We're gonna go forward with them anyway.
No doubt.
Okay. So, what are strategies you guys are using to be productive in a good way while you're working remote? Aside from like setting time aside, to clear my head and make sure I have freedom. What are some nuts and bolts, like little things you do? How do you take notes? How do you ensure that you have the appropriate tasks? Like, what tools are you using to help you be productive in an engaged way? Because that's the key, right? Not just being productive, but being productive in an engaged way, so that it's positive productivity.
Do you know, I'm going to jump in and just steal the...
Good.
No,
I wasn't ready to answer.
I'm so passionate about this, and I tell everybody who starts at Unily the same thing, that there's so much value, and this can apply to our customers or people who aren't our customers. Whatever your intranet is or your digital workplace and how it's set up, there is so much value in taking time in your morning to check into what's going on in the business by checking into your intranet. Like, so much that has provided me so much value to stay connected, one, to an international company, right? We're based in all different countries in the world, people that I maybe have never met but feel very connected to because I interact with them on social. Also staying in touch with what's going on, seeing social chatter happening. And I'm not talking about Teams, I'm talking about like or Slack. I'm talking about like connecting on content that's being pushed out. And it's learning too, because it's important for you to stay engaged and feel connected to the, like, what's mission critical and what's our objectives for this quarter. Like, you have to stay in the know about what's going on in the business. If you let yourself fall behind on the happenings of what's going on, that's where that disconnect, in my opinion, starts happening, where you end up, especially remote, on your own little island, like without a paddle, just trying to figure out like what's next. So for me, that keeps me very productive, setting aside time in the morning, first thing, no matter what, doing that. And then you and I mean, we have check-ins just about like what's happening today, what's critical, what's happening in the week. That keeps me, on task too, just setting myself up for the week and the day to say, like, this is what I got to get done. These are the questions I need answered. This is what's happening next.
Kaz, what about
and
you?
That's
Well, and we're done because Caitlin knocked it out of the park, so nothing left to say. But Kaz, go ahead, Kaz.
I'm going to steal some of Caitlin's inspiration there and implement some of that, because maybe that's where I'm missing out. But I was going to come in with a slightly more unconventional answer, which is partly inspired by Matt, actually. So Matt and I work in the same team, and so if we're thinking about like productivity, one of the things we do, or one of the outputs we have, is ultimately, right, the Unily product. And we collectively want to get the best product for our customers, and it has to work the right way, and we have to make sure that we do the right thing. And in order to do that, we need to be super considered, and therefore we have this kind of like candid debate culture where, especially if you're not sure on something, it's good to throw it out to the team. To make sure you get the right output, have so many different angles on it, because, and that's the thing when you're working remotely, it's quite easy to just stay isolated at your screen doing your work. So to kind of help that productivity, one thing Matt did one day was that we all work in slightly different time zones, have different meetings, and it's difficult for everyone to be free at the same time. and you don't want people's schedules to stop your progress on something. So we were debating something via text, and I think Matt must have been on the go doing something on his afternoon walk, and he just voice noted, right? And he used the Teams app to voice note us, and he was like, "Hey, so I think blah 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 blah," and in that voice note, it was only like a minute or two long, but in that there was so much more depth to the conversation and the debate, which we may not have got over the text or email format. And I found that in itself to be quite productive, because I was like, I know how he's coming at this now, and I kind of feel the emotion and the perspective in that, which helps with the debate and the innovation and making sure you're getting the right thing, which perhaps a more structured text-like format doesn't provide. So I know it's kind of more intangible, but I found that to be productive, because then I was like, hell, I'm gonna voice note back.
I love a good voice memo.
So and I do it in my personal life a lot, so why on earth wouldn't I do it in a work scenario?
So before I ask Matt the same question, it's funny you say that, because I guess different mediums matter, right? So we put out a lot of written stuff in terms of our marketing and learning materials that we give to customers and prospects in the sales process as well. And yet here we are doing a podcast. Why? We're already producing stuff. So I think there's a lot to what you're saying, Kaz. What do they say? Some people are visual learners, some people are audio learners, right? But Matt, what about you? What are the strategies and or tools you use to kind of stay productive plus engaged? I'm going to call it productivity plus engagement equals heart, if we're going to use emojis.
Well, first I would like to point out that voice notes are the way forwards. If you cannot be at your desk, it's a very natural thing to do, I think. And I just, I knew at the time, I was thinking, this could be weird. And then I just thought,
you did it anyway.
Yeah, I did it anyway. Because, God, if you, on the podcast, you get around to doing something around, change in internal comms, love to come back and chat on that. I just think, with the remote work and the kind of productivity and collaboration angle especially, it can be a little bit feel a little bit less human. I find it very, very difficult to convey tone of voice, when you're messaging, when you're typing, typing emails, whatever else. I'm one of those people who reads it back 3 times before they press send, because I wouldn't want somebody to read it and go, don't like this guy. Which I'm sure happens anyway, but no, that's another story. But from a productivity perspective, I think for me, what really helps me be productive, especially in the latter half of the day, is getting outside, fresh air. I hadn't actually noticed before that when I went to the office, I would never leave the office. I would do my 9 till 5:30. Some nights I'd stay late and whatever. And I'd realised by the end of it, I'd spent, however many hours, I don't know, 9 hours or something, in the same space, and not really left. And what I've found is that a change of scenery, especially if there's a bit of fresh air involved, is incredibly helpful. I find that actually what it gives me is a bit of a reset. Kind of almost feel like I do 2 half days. Come back in the afternoon and I'm like, cool. It's that downtime, the thinking time as well. If I've encountered problems in the morning or challenges in the morning, and I want to kind of tackle those, solve those, actually change of scenery, bit of fresh air, that time to think really helps me come back. And when we talk about productivity measurements at Unily, I'd say that for us especially, it feels like a really good environment in terms of the fact that we're not just measured upon, very base level outputs. Coming up with a really creative solution to a problem is really recognised, and it is considered to be incredibly productive and valuable too. So that for me, I think fresh air, change of scenery is crucial.
So you heard it here first, though. Audio is the wave of the future in terms of
And I agree.
personal productivity. Really?
I send
Why-
voice memos all the time, especially because, maybe this is me. I talk a lot, but like if I want to get out a point and maybe it's a really cool story with my friends in a group text or something, and same applies to work. Like it's just easier to record a voice memo and send it instead of being like forever.
That's
and
why, right?
It's more productive. It's more efficient.
It is.
Yeah.
It's more efficient. It's faster.
I'm gonna start doing it more.
I
in
don't
Teams,
get
Matt.
it.
I'm gonna do it.
Okay, I will make a promise to you both. I'm gonna try this out. My buddy's wife. We have a group chat in a messaging app. Who shall go nameless for now because I don't want people to know that I use old fogey kind of tools and stuff in my purse.
What is it?
I'm not talking. I'm not. Oh, I know. Anyway, she almost as a rule sends the audio things, and I've stopped listening to them. And I find a couple hours later, I'll go to my wife and be like, "What did she say? What did she talk about? Is it anything I need to know about?" Maybe I'm just oh God, I've entered that phase of life where I don't want to try new things. That's terrifying. Kaz, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, if we do a podcast on resistance to change,
Yeah.
then
You can leave that one. Yeah.
Ooh. He teed it right up, actually. I think we have our next topic. Well, okay, no, let's keep going. And let's talk about client or customer examples. What are either some of the ways you've helped customers yourselves improve productivity plus engagement? That's my new thing, by the way. I'm going to get a t-shirt with that for sure. Productivity plus engagement, right? Equals success. What are some of the things you've either done or you've seen them kind of discover on their own? Because we don't always have the answers. One of the great things about Unily is our customers come to us with great ideas. And we swipe them and throw them in the product. But personal experience, Kaz, when you were in consulting, what are some of the things you saw or helped customers kind of get productivity plus engagement?
So I think that it's a difficult one to answer because every client's a little bit different, and I feel like I have a badge from each client where I've taken a lesson from each one. And I think one thing that I've learned along the journey is that to really invest in understanding the organization and their people, and that's that engagement side, right? You need to understand where your baseline is, because we work with some super high tech clients where everyone's got mobile devices and they're coming from a great platform and really want to level it up, and then you have others where the baseline is much lower, they're more on the go. And the one that comes to mind as an example is one of our clients, which works in the kind of healthcare industry, and it was actually one of the first healthcare industry clients I was working with, where I previously worked a lot more with professional services and manufacturing and things like that. And one thing I learned from that client was through the conversation and doing the persona work, understanding. I remember one particular time actually was. The project lead took me out to the hospital, right, and in the wards, and we were speaking to doctors and nurses and understanding what they do, and just observing the way they work, I found really interesting because I could then see, right, okay, so this is how they're trying to access documentation. What process are they going through? And what I learned from that was actually that the way that their users and their employees are working is very, how I would describe, structure driven, meaning that the way I think about it visually is if everyone remembers that kind of Windows Explorer where you open a folder and then another folder and then another folder and then another folder, that kind of way of working. And what that made me realize is, okay, obviously that has a time implication in terms of productivity. So it takes a while to go through that to find what you need, and especially in the healthcare industry, right? You want to minimize that time as much as possible, because if you're trying to get critical documentation, then that's something that you really want to invest in. So by working with those employees, I realized that actually there's a slight mindset change that needs to happen, and it's not just about the technology, right? Because we we can knock that out the park when it comes to efficient search experiences and things like that. But there's this challenge of this kind of change challenge, which is understanding the employee mindset. So then what I could do was then, let's run this project slightly differently. What we want to do is not have the traditional project team. What we want to do is bring in more of your frontline workers in the process, help them craft the way, challenge their thinking a little bit, see how far we can push them. But ultimately, we don't want that kind of pursuit of perfect productivity, which we could aim for, but we don't want the pursuit of that to stop any progress. So kind of having those incremental productivity improvements, bringing along the people is much more powerful and useful than it is to say, we've designed this amazing productive experiences and we're going to roll it out and get everyone to use it. It's that engagement side and getting people along that journey is the hard bit. So my tip there was investing, understanding the people, because that's where where you want to get to.
I was going to say, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yes.
I think is another internal person has used that phrase, and I'm just going to pass off as my own.
Who's done that?
Matt Harding. I was like, I love it, man. I love it. What a hero. It's a great phrase.
What about you, Kate?
Hero.
What a hero.
What a term. I was thinking of something where a client wanted to introduce a large retail company, multinational, recognizable brand, but they wanted to introduce community sites, and they had their own word for it. But when we were kind of strategizing how we were going to introduce that, the governance model that their team was kind of their admin team or community was suggesting was such that there was a request every time, and then it was reviewed and approved, and then they would build the unique site for that person based on what they needed. And I was like, hey guys, that's not really scalable. You don't have time for that. This isn't your full, just putting it out there. It's this isn't your full-time job, and rarely people who are adminning their Unily sites, it's rarely a full-time job, or maybe you have one full-time community manager. But instead of doing that, it was, let's try a templated experience where you identify leads within, different departments or functions that can have the ability to just create a space within, from a template, and see how it goes. And they took that. That's exactly the approach. I do really like that phrase, by the way, that, what was it? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It is a really good one, because that's exactly the approach we took. Let's not draw out the introduction of this. It was a business, kind of executive visibility, business critical. They wanted to introduce these community spaces, and it was so successful that, just as predicted, the volume of incoming requests to have these unique community spaces was so high that it needed to be they needed to extend the autonomy to people. So flexed, because they're working with Unily, so it's a flexible system, flex the governance model, flex the created templates based on different needs, and extended the opportunity for people to create those, and then iterated on it too, following that, saying, you know what, now we need a great search experience to find your community, and we need to introduce social channels specifically because now this team needs it and that team needs it. So flex the templates for them for people to create. So being okay with introducing something and then iterating it based on changing needs was super important. And that's I'd say one of I'd say like a productivity. So that was more on the admin side versus the employee side, but it is enabling people to do things quickly, create a space that you want, and just getting on with it immediately, essentially, or within minutes, to start sharing and collaborating and, communicating with each other.
What about you, Matt?
Yeah, no, I think actually, there's both a project that I worked on back when I was a consultant once upon a time, believe it or not.
Seems so long ago.
I know, it's crazy, but I implemented a project for a client in travel and tourism, as I see we're not naming names. And actually, there's another really good case study for this as well in oil and gas. But ultimately, I think from a productivity perspective, I think the simple ability to aggregate an organization's digital tools and actually define purpose. It's interesting because we've talked a lot about productivity over the course of this podcast. We've talked about how, measuring time on task is not necessarily the most beneficial way to talk about productivity. But I will say that saving people time in their day does help to improve productivity. And, that shouldn't necessarily be discounted as an important measure. Obviously completing work takes time. And if we can make it quicker for people, then we are able to give them back some of that time to be more productive. Essentially the solutions that I'm talking to in both these two client cases are, a single searchable collection of all the different business tools that everyone needs to do their job. This is a library of quick links. It's the digital launch pad, however you want to phrase it, however you want to name it. It's actually quite simple to achieve. But when we talk about, predictions from leading analyst firms about, the number of apps in each organization are going to increase by, I think it's 25% over the next 4 years by 2025, you're looking at this big boom in the number of digital tools in the business, which increases complexity, decreases clarity on what you should be using when, and therefore slows down the process of actually getting to the right system to get work done. And I think just being able to deliver that experience that directs people to a tool and says, this is when you use this tool and this is what it's good for, that in of itself is a really simple way to boost productivity. And we know that during the pandemic and with remote work, people have organizations just absorbed technology like at an unprecedented rate. You see like statistics around adoption of Zoom and Teams, and it's just gone through the roof. And it's the same for lots of other systems because people have had to find digital alternatives to, things that happened naturally, like in shared spaces. So they just kind of technology pools, digital landscapes for organizations just kind of sprawling, and trying to make sense of that, delivering some kind of coherent message and directing people to where they need to go, like in an efficient manner. That in of itself is powerful productivity boost.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to give you the final question of the day. It doesn't need to be taken too seriously. The question is, what did we learn today? Kaz, what did we learn today? Or what did you learn today?
I learned not to send you a voice note.
That's a good idea.
I actually think I've learned a lot from this conversation. I think it's good that we've disagreed on a few topics and stuff. But I think I've learned that, especially from kind of Caitlin's productivity versus engagement debate that we had, I think what I've learned is that probably the most important thing is to zoom out a little bit when it comes to productivity. So don't get super fixated on specific metrics, and there's value, there is a place for metrics, but don't laser focus on them, because you'll probably work to them and not consider some of the more intangible external things that ultimately contribute to productivity. So that would be mine.
Matt, what did we learn today? What did you learn today?
It's a good question. Can I go last? I want to hear what Caitlin says.
That's exactly the point. Off the cuff. And you could say I learned absolutely nothing, which means we'd never have you back. I learned loads. No, do you know what? There's a lot of interesting things. I think actually having the discussion today, I learned that actually it's not completely terrible to focus on the numbers to a certain degree. I think Kaz made a good case for an opportunity to, understand routine, and where possible, really document progress and achievements, and then afterwards that led me to saying, things like saving people time
and tracking time isn't necessarily all bad. And I think like we do need to take a balanced view of productivity. Some of those traditional measures may at first seem a little bit outdated, but actually there's merit in taking a balanced approach to how we track our business's progress towards our goal.
Well said. And Kate, what did we learn today? Or what did you learn today?
I'm a model of productivity, so I didn't have anything to learn. No, I'm just kidding. I am always trying to find ways to be more efficient, actually. So I really, really liked Matt's point about being connected to the mission. And in fact, on day anybody I think could use that as a takeaway of like days that you might be feeling disconnected or less productive, like maybe refer back to some info or content about your culture and connect with an employee, talk about that and think back to your routine or whatever you've set up and in place. And the other thing I learned, I laughed when you said hero, Matt, is because I am so used to one of my favorite Britishisms or words is legend. Instead of
the
hero,
man, the legend.
I love saying that. Legend when someone does something good, not hero. So anyways, that's why I giggled with that. But so I learned that too. Let's start calling people heroes. I think on a serious note, that point about staying connected to the overall business objectives, super important to staying engaged and productive.
Yeah, I learned that Caitlin is an overperformer even when she doesn't have to be. I said I was expecting one. What did we learn? And she just had to come with two.
Just went on for 15 minutes.
As an aside, I really loved, and it's an idea I never considered. This idea of, even though I knew it intuitively, I don't think about it enough because I think there's this drive. We're told you need to be as efficient and perform as well as you can possibly do. We're told that from a young age, right? Succeed, do a good job, get an A+ on that thing. But there's a time element, a short-termism that can actually work against you in the long term. And I love that concept. I'm going to play around with that actually in my own life and maybe start asking myself, is this a short-term gain that is ultimately gonna hurt me in the long term, right? Am I putting pressure on myself to fix my radiator when in fact I could benefit from spending that time outside with my son, so he has a memory that will help him develop into a more full human being, right? I'm gonna question that stuff a lot more. So my lesson is way more profound than anything any of you guys came up with. I'm just the best. No, on a serious note, I'm a legend. On a serious note, definitely not a legend or anything like that. Thank you guys again. This is still fun. To you out there in the universe, as we say, don't forget, subscribe, comment. We really are going to read the things you put in those comments. So do whatever you think is appropriate with that bit of knowledge. We want to know what you like, what you need, and what we could be doing better. Thanks again, everyone.
Great podcast, Paul Cedar.
Video has commenced.
Legend.
I'm getting ready, boys.